Thank you, Shrikant. I know you have read the book.
I'm very, I'm just waiting for it.
Awesome. Great. So I've just started recording. I'm sure Pam will be here in a few minutes. So meanwhile, so so I've seen a lot of the questions reaching us about about the book, and this as whoever has read the book knows that this book is all about the being of the coach, right? How do you nurture the being of the coach? So what has really what has taken your attention in the book? Shrikant, Anubha, I guess you guys have read the book. So what was your biggest
Yeah, so
attention?
let me get started. Yeah, I think you recommended this book to me about more than a month ago, and I actually got hold of an audiobook and kept listening. I keep running, so I kept listening. So every time I listen, I finish the book. I learn something. The second or third time when I listen, this particular thing just jumped out of the book. Who you are is how you coach, right? It didn't come out in the first two instances. What I understood is presence is the most important thing, and then she spoke about the other components like empathy, courage, feelings, boundaries, and embodiment. But finally, it boils down to who you are is how you coach, right? It's about if you want to become a better coach, it's about going deeper and deeper within you to see what's happening in you. And that was the biggest key takeaway for me from that book.
And that's interesting when you say that, right? So a lot of times we think we are aware, but we are not. And there is no measurement for awareness. There's no place where I say, "Hey, I've reached," because wherever we reach, it's beyond what we have seen in the past. It's always ahead. So you always feel, "Hey, I'm self-aware." But what happens? What does it really mean to say you coach as the way you are? I'm I have that question for Pam, but just trying to brainstorm with you. What do you think? What it what could it really mean? Because everybody feels they are self-aware. I feel I'm self-aware, but there is beyond that. There is so much beyond that. Just a
I
con-
think she very beautifully, I'd like to sort of join in the conversation. I thought that the whole framework of the inner landscape takes one a little beyond or expands the meaning of self awareness. At least that's what it did for me. And for me, the insight went a little further to say it's not just about uh, who I am as a coach, but also who I need to be and who I should be. And I think that to me was probably the most what caught my attention the most, and it's been extremely inspiring and compelling more than anything to then go a little further and read it. Of course, on the very the notion of the dark words was definitely something that made me pick up the book and read it almost nonstop.
Yeah. Uh, and also, one more thing which really came out is that empathy doesn't mean that you have to just keep making the coach or the client or the coachee feel very comfortable and cozy, right? Empathy is to support and make the client feel the heat, because if you don't make the client feel the heat, the client is not going to take any action. And you're being just nice to the client and it's not helping the client.
yeah. In fact, what was interesting for me personally was that this book is 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 very close to philosophical aspect of the character and the coach, right? If philosophically you talk about, hey, this is how we should be and this is who you should be, but in the real world we struggle to even achieve that or reach there or even understand what it means, right? And the book has beautifully, by sharing the frameworks on things like empathy and courage and all the seven aspects, has beautifully gave me a path to say, hey, this is how you see things, right? So far I used to think, hey, it's very philosophical, and I like it, but how do I explain? And that's what the book has cracked for me. How do you explain empathy? How do you explain courage? How do you explain some of the very softer things like presence? And how beautifully it says, your presence has an impact on the conversation or the work that you're doing as a coach. So that I really found very intriguing when it gave me frameworks around very, very softer aspects, especially like presence we all struggle with. What else has been your revelation? Anybody can jump in. We are waiting for Pam. Something is maybe not okay that she hasn't joined yet. So we're just utilizing this time to have this conversation about the book. So anybody is welcome. Even if you have not read the book is all about the being of the coach, that you coach the way you are. What do you have to say about that? What's your experience?
And one more.
Sorry. Go
Sorry,
ahead.
Hari. No, no, carry on. You carry on. Sorry.
So, thank you, Jaya, for this. So, my own understanding of the whole thing is, yes, I am self-aware that where I am currently, whether I accept it and take actions to change it or not, I think that's where the crux lies. Because being aware is great, but am I doing those consistent daily or whatever actions to ensure they are corrected to the extent I believe it's corrected? I think that's where the crux lies, to my mind.
So true. So true. Yeah, Shrikant, you would say.
Yeah, one more thing that she mentions about presence to our ecology, right? It's not about your presence, the client's presence, the coach's presence, and also she mentioned about be aware of the. I mean, if you're in an executive coaching engagement, be aware of the corporate culture, the country, its culture, and so many things. So the presence doesn't mean just your presence. That was a that was a big revelation for me. And although she said that uh, work you working in the room. What did she say? Something similar to that, right? Work in the room, or I'm not able to catch the exact phrase.
Work with what you have in the room.
Yes. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, very interesting. What has also intrigued me was it's so we have all known about the frameworks, the process, the tools, and everything. But what takes the maximum time is the being, and that's like a lifetime journey. Like there is no one place. It's a journey in itself. And how do you really have some frameworks in place to be able to say, hey, I've done some work, but there is more to do. What else?
Yeah,
Yes.
this is Himani.
Hi, Himani.
Yeah, I haven't read the book, so maybe I can hold on to my curiosity. But I do have a question right at the outset,
Mm.
um, because a traditional school of coaching, and that where we talk about coaching as such, it's like all about the coachee and the coachee's journey and their agenda and everything to do with them. So just as a, I mean, starting off as a, even if I do that for my curiosity, uh, so how does my awareness, my self-awareness, and my being
Mm.
really matter at the end of the day to my to my coaching journey?
Yes, and here you have Pam to answer that. She's just here, so I'm inviting her into the room. You may have to repeat your question, Himani, once she's here. Pam. Hi, Pam.
Good morning.
Good morning, Pam. How are you?
Very well.
Thank you for taking out this time for us, Pam. Really honored.
Abs-
Thank you so
abs-
much. We have
abs-
curious coaches here waiting to hear from you about your story, about this book that you have written, and so many curious questions already started pouring in. So, welcome once again.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just do one thing and I'll be right back. So would you say a little bit about everyone who's present here? So I have some sense of the kind of work you're doing and where you are in your coaching journey.
Yeah, Pam. So we are mostly are from India, are in various stages of our journey, mostly engaged in doing leadership coaching work as much as I know. And some of them are also working with parents and life coaches. So um, that's really the mix of coaches here on the call. And the topic about the self has really intrigued us simply because um,
Great. And just a one logistic piece is that if we wanted to 2 or 3 times during this move into a smaller discussion, are you able to do that? Wonderful. Okay, perfect. I am not as good at that, so I'm glad that you are. All right. So I have, I'll just say a few words before I pull up a slide deck. My own background is a mixture of, I spent many years in my early career as a clinical and organizational psychologist. And my late husband and myself started in the late 80s, one of the very early coaching programs that existed in the US. And it really was at a time when there was not a clear sense of exactly what coaching was. It had been we had been involved in some mentoring, and it, I think, for many was born out of some of the work in that area. And look where we are today. You know, we know so much about what does it take to create a meaningful, successful coaching engagement. What are the ingredients? And you all know all of these things from the work that you have done. And yet, even with all of the tools and the resources and the reading that we have, what we come to understand is that our own ability to know well our internal landscape matters. That when we have a sense of our internal landscape, which is ever growing, ever developing, ever changing, that we have the capacity then to use ourselves in more intentional ways. And so you see in the literature these phrases like self as instrument or use of self. And that is a passion of mine, that how do we best do this? And so I'm going to pull up some slides that reflect some work that I have done for some time, and some writing. And we'll see if I can hit the spot in ways that bring some meaning to you. So hold on here a second.
Sure, Pam. Thank you.
So I wrote this book a couple of years ago, and that title is actually Self as Coach, Self as Leader, which is pretty interesting that in your work, I'm sure you know, coaching leaders, that it's often in the how we show up, how that leader shows up, that our work is focused on. It's not generally on technical skills. It's really on the dimensions that matter so much for a leader. So we'll focus on self as coach, but if you do a lot of work with leaders, you might be doing that automatic translation in your head. And so, you know, an earlier book of mine, the completely revised handbook of coaching, is one that really examines all of the dimensions that are required for us in this work as coaches. And I have here this wonderful quote that comes from a colleague in the UK, Edna Murdoch, who you are is how you coach and how you lead. So some of you might know Edna's work. She's written a little bit, but I love this notion of who you are is how you coach. It really says it all, doesn't it? That we need much more than a dentist or an accountant or an attorney. We need to know who we are, what our internal landscape is. And so one area that we talk about is this notion that our context and the identities that we're either born with or that we develop over time really inform our, we might call it our root stories or our narrative. And our narrative informs our internal landscape. So we don't all have the same internal landscape, thank goodness, because we all come into this world in particular contexts, and we have both chosen and given identities, and all of these impact what our root stories are, and that then informs our internal internal landscape. And so I'm not going to, we won't have time to drop into smaller group discussions for all of these, but I do have some reflection pauses, and you might give that some consideration. The extent to which your own identity and your context impacts how you show up as a coach, how your own identity and the context in which you have spent much of your life impacts how you show up as a coach. We could say, and as a human being. You know, how does it impact how you show up as a human being? And let me just stop there and see if anyone has a comment, a reflection they might be willing to share on that front.
So Pam, this is Johnny. In when you speak of identity, in addition to how you're also, I'm understanding that you're also saying, who are you showing up as a coach? Is that
Yes.
it's not just how you show up, but how I'm showing up, but also who am I showing up as?
Yeah, and our own awareness of that. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any reflections, folks? How does your identity impact how you show up? Your context.
So, Pam, I feel that the piece of identity and the context is heavily spoken in transactional analysis and attachment theory that you've also mentioned in the book. Now, there is a very interesting question that came up while we were asking for registration. Say, hey, what do I do if I'm stuck in my identity and I don't know how to come out of it? And then
Yeah.
how do I deal with that?
And so, can you give me an example of being stuck in your identity?
So let's say I know why I am like I'm in a particular way, why I show up like this, why I behave like this. However, I don't know the way out. It's
Yeah.
heavily dominated by my parenting, by parenting I received, my experience, my childhood experience, and I'm aware about that. Now, how do I deal with that?
Yeah, I think that's the human dilemma right there, right? You know, I often tell this story. I don't know if I wrote about this in the book, but that I grew up on a cattle ranch and a grain farm, and there was a lot of work to be done all the time, which is quite different than where I live now, I got a lot of rewards for working hard, and I got extra credit. I often say I got extra credit for going it alone. So if there was a problem that occurred wherever I was, whatever I was doing, if I could figure it out on my own, I got extra credit. I got more kudos, more applause. And so that became part of my identity because it was the context of my life. And it doesn't work as a leader it doesn't work as a leader. You can't be going it alone to be a good leader. And so I think all of us face whatever it is for us, that if we can see it, we're partway there. But then the work is to really amplify our awareness of that habit, that way of being, to even wonder regularly about what I might be missing when I stay in that habit, or what the cost might be of staying in that habit. And I think that amplification of our awareness really starts to help us get motivated to make a change. So I'll leave it there for now, but I think what you're touching on is really at the heart of all of our work as coach as well. So I built this model to provide coaches with a sense of what do we mean when we say our internal landscape? What do we mean when we say, how can I use myself well as an instrument? And I know that this is overlapping. It probably changes relative to those that we're working with and in our own development. But what you can see here is that I make presence a bit larger than everything else, purposely because our presence is something that we're continually cultivating. And there are these dimensions that seem to really have almost a hierarchical dimension to them. That is that first we have to, as coaches, be present to ourselves. What is happening in me as I am with you? What is my internal chatter about? Am I internally asking myself, am I doing the right thing? Could I be asking something else? Am I in judgment about this person and what they're bringing forward? How much of my time is spent in that area? And as I become increasingly aware of that, can I put some of that on the shelf and allow myself to be more present to what is happening here in this moment? And of course, there are many ways that we can hone this kind of presence. Probably the fastest way that takes a long time is a mindfulness practice, whatever that might be for us. That the ability to be aware of what's happening inside me is accentuated by a regular mindfulness practice, which does not require that we sit on a pillow for 20 or 30 minutes every day in the same room with a candle burning, that we can do this in all sorts of ways. So if it seems hard to take something like that on, imagine all you might need to do to start it is 2 or 3 minutes a day. We all have 2 or 3 minutes a day to practice some mindfulness. And it is once we have done that, that we seem more capable then of being present to what is happening in the other person. That when I have been able to drop my own internal chatter, maybe it's my self-criticism, when I've been able to really allow any judgments to recede, then I am much more capable of noticing what is happening for the other in this moment. And then finally, that dance, what is happening with the two of us as we work together. And I think this work we do in developing our presence is work that lasts forever, that we're always engaged in this kind of work. So let me just stop and see what that stirs. If anybody has an experience that resonates with this, or what you're thinking or feeling as I talk about this. Any comments?
So I have a question. As a new coach, the most internal chatter that happens in my mind is that, would I be able to ask the right questions? Like sometimes it is about less confidence, even if I would have delivered some good sessions in the past, right? And I feel that reflects on my session itself because it's not going into that smooth manner. And I often tend to ask some leading questions in that. That's my, sense of awareness that I had till now. And because of that, sometimes my pace also goes up and down, so I'm not able to do mirroring or mapping or whatever exercises we have. I lose track of that because I have too much focus on this internal chatter.
Yeah, so I thank you for saying that, and I think that we all experience that, and we definitely experience it more when we're early on in the journey,
Yeah.
and so where you are, I think that you would find that you have a lot of company, and that what probably you need most is to be understanding with yourself, to go, that this is part of the journey, and as you are more aware of that, more accepting, it might recede just a bit, but I think that is a normal part of the journey that we're on as coach. Any other comments?
Yeah, Pam, I want to make a comment. I'm Srikant, based in Bangalore. Jaya recommended this book to me about 2 months ago, and I have listened to it like I don't know, 4 or 5 times already. So one thing that which was clearly coming out for me, if you are able to make yourself present to the client 100%, I think your attention to listening becomes better,
Mm-hmm.
and questions happen spontaneously. You don't have to think what question
Yes.
to ask.
Mm-hmm.
So you allow the client to speak, give enough space, and the questions naturally come. That's what I realized. So I've been practicing coaching, and Jay has witnessed some of my coaching. Every time that I have made myself available for the client, the conversations have become better, the questions have become better for the client, and insights have become better for the client.
Yeah. And how long have you been at that work?
You mean coaching?
Mm-hmm.
I've been coaching for more than 10 years, but I've read the
Hey.
book only 2 months ago. And that has been a huge revelation for me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
so
mean,
yeah. So
isn't
the
it?
most important thing is,
Yeah.
the most important thing is that it's not about me asking a powerful question. It's not about that at all. I realized the powerful question has to make sense to the client. It's not about me being proud about asking, oh, I asked this fantastic question. No, it could be a simple question like, what else?
Yeah, yeah. So I love that you say that, and what I think of as you're saying that as well is this wonderful work of Richard Boyatzis. And I think he has a book by the title of Resonance, but he talks about what you're describing as being in a resonance chamber,
Yes.
where everything else is outside of us, and we're in the moment, and something can happen when we're in that resonance chamber, and you've been doing it for 10 years, and so it takes time to develop that kind of presence, and that becomes a powerful thing. So it allows us to let me just move forward here. uh, um, it allows us then to move on and to see these other dimensions with more ease. And so presence takes time, it takes practice, it takes awareness, and it is absolutely essential part of our work. If we could say that is so fundamental that we have to have a practice that continually hones our presence, I think this would be very wise for us.
Coaching with compassion for lifelong learning.
Not sure what that is that's happening there, but so the next area that I talk about is empathy, and we know that our ability to connect well with our client is really essential, and I offer up a continuum for our consideration, and I often talk about what is empathy. Empathy is the ability to walk in the shoes of another without wearing the shoes. To walk in the shoes of another without wearing their shoes. And if we think about the continuum of, on the one hand, if I have too little empathy, you tell me about something that I was just on a call. It was actually someone from my office before this who is who has just driven to her grandmother's home because her grandmother is in her last day or two of life. And then there is this work that has to happen. And so if I had moved into the work that has to happen, this would not have been a good connection for us. But instead we spent time talking about what is it like for her to be in this moment with her grandmother as she passes. And so if I have too little, if I am only in my head, if I'm not noticing what is happening for this person, the connection will not be there for us to do work that is meaningful. But what gets interesting is that if I care too much, if I'm overly invested, I also lose my potency, my ability to connect in ways that really matter. So what's interesting about this is some of us are more prone to overcaring, to wanting in some ways to put on a cape and rescue the other. And some of us might be prone to undercaring, or whatever the word might be that works for you. And so what I like about this continuum is to say, let's from time to time reflect on where we are and what adjustments we might need to make to be at our best in our coaching. The other part of empathy that is quite interesting, that is being written about a lot, is this notion that we have to take care of ourselves in order to be there for another person. And some of you might know the work of Otto Scharmer, Theory U, and I love this quote of his: "The success of an intervention depends upon the inner condition of the intervener." Or this little graphic, "You can't pour from an empty cup, so we have to take care of ourselves." So if I am preoccupied with something, if I am rushing in from one coaching session to another, if I am not taking care of myself, it is not going to be easy for me to be there for you. So self-care turns out for us as coaches to be an ethical practice. Are you taking care of yourself? Are you arriving at a coaching session replenished, present, able to do the work? And if you're not, what small adjustments can you make? What small practices could you engage in that would allow you to invest in self-care in everyday ways, Any comments when I say this?
So Pam, I would like to hear from you about the role supervision plays to,
Yes,
to take
thank
care.
you. Yes, thank you for asking. So I think supervision plays a very big role in all of this, we have been invested in supervision for many years now. It's, supervision, I often say this about supervision because people will have some resistance to that word, right? And I say, well, let's think of it in this way. Let's think of it as supersizing our vision. being able to get on the balcony together. So most of what I do is group supervision. Get on the balcony together and look at a piece of work or a pattern and see if we can see it from other angles. And it is a chance for us to press pause and look at our work instead of being in our work. And honestly, I think that in a perfect world, every coach should always be in supervision. It doesn't have to be, once a month is enough, but that without supervision, we are likely to go back to sleep or to go back to habit or to insufficiently examine where our own growth is and where we can continue to grow. So, yeah, I think that when we talk about the inner landscape, that supervision puts a spotlight on this for us. You may have, and the chances are we've all ended up in a coaching engagement where we're saying to ourselves, whether we say it to anybody else or not, where we say to ourselves, this person is not ready for coaching, or this person, I think I should just let this person go. And I always say, well, let's talk about us first. Let's talk about what's happening for you first, and spend time here and notice what can we learn from observing ourselves. What adjustments can we make that might actually change what happens in this interaction? So thank you for asking that about supervision. Any other comments about empathy?
There are no comments. Pam, you mentioned about Richard Boyce. He's written a book titled Helping People Change with Compassion.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a fantastic book as well.
Mm-hmm. No, I'll just say one other thing about Richard Boyce. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
I have a question to ask that which keeps on coming back to me. That is that, whom am I serving?
Whom are you serving?
Yeah.
And what is your answer to that?
It's kind of an answer that I get. It's a mixed dilemma, I would say, like that. Sometimes I feel like I'm serving the client. Sometimes I feel like I'm serving myself. Sometimes I feel like I'm serving something bigger than me. Like.
Mm-hmm. Me too. I would say that when we're at our best, that we are doing work that is meaningful for the other, and that other is inside a system, and there are nested systems. And so it may be that if I am coaching someone inside an organization, I'm serving them, I'm serving their team, I'm serving the organization, and hopefully that organization is serving our world. And so I think that nested element is at play. If we are doing work that allows people to grow and to do what they're doing in ways that are more effective for them and others, hopefully we're also impacting our world. So I think it's a powerful question that you ask. Who am I serving? I know for myself, my commitment in my life is that I want my contributions to make the world a better place, because our world needs that so much, and that I have that on my mind often, and it allows me to see beyond the one other or the team, and I think that is powerful for us to think in that way. We live in a time where our world needs so much of us, and our work can play an important role in that. So,
I have
you
a
know,
question.
go ahead, go ahead. Mhm.
In considering this line of thought that I also want to be of service to the world and the larger good, or the intent is that at times one feels that one's inner state is not really there. You're not. Your own life has its own challenges, and how do I know that I am ready for that meeting with another person who kind of is looking forward to that whole interaction, and that my being there for that person, when there are things that I may not be able to probably leave behind. I know that there are ways and means to do that, and we can offer our presence, but there are times that probably that doesn't happen. I just want to know that what's a good way to know that, okay, when do you not then step into that role and then take care of yourself, and is there any foolproof way to do that, or we just go by our gut?
I think there is some use of gut and intuition, but I think your question is an important one, and the part of it that I focus on is really about how do I go inside and do an assessment of where I am, and how do I put things on the shelf. We all have things happening in our lives that can be challenging, and sometimes can be extraordinarily challenging. And there may be times in our lives when it is impossible for us to be present to another. And so an ethical practice is to take a little time out. Most often, what is happening for us is that I, like you, can get preoccupied with something. And so how do I put that on the shelf and give voice to it, and then put it on the shelf so I can be present to you. And I think that again is served by a mindfulness practice, honestly. So I have this thing happening in my life right now that's a very, very sweet thing, and that is that I am in San Francisco, which is not my home, and I'm staying here because one of my sons finally, after a lot of years and a lot of patience, one of my children had a child. And so I have a grandchild. And it is like this magical moment. And so what the mother and father tell me in these early times is their mind is unable to do anything but focus on this baby. And so to try to do something else in this moment is really impossible. So that's a good thing for us to know, right? In some moments, we simply aren't able to be present. But most of the time, our work is managing ourselves, noticing what's going on, taking care of ourselves, doing what we need to do to put things on the shelf. So I'm going to keep going, but I love that you just jump in with some of these things. So let's just keep talking as these things stir things. The next area that I talk about in our internal landscape is our feelings. And I think what is interesting about feelings is that our identity, our cultural experience, our early years in our family tend to mold the feelings that are okay and not okay, the feelings that I am at ease with and those that I just work very hard to stay away from. And that in coaching, that does not work so well. That in coaching, if we think of part of our work as being a steady source who can contain what our client brings to us, then that means that we need to have ease and agility with a wide range of feelings. And that tends to be work for all of us. Like some of us may want everyone to be happy all the time because that's what we're comfortable with. And so that means that we're not going to be able to contain those feelings that are complicated and dark sometimes. And some of us may be very uncomfortable with anger or conflict, and so there won't be that ability to create that container for that. So I think that our own repertoire is work for us always, and a good place to experiment is to notice where's my comfort zone, what feelings are slightly outside of or on the edge of my comfort, and how do I expand that, extend that. And I often say to people who are early in the coaching journey is that it's really important for us to remember that we human beings have the ability to feel conflicting feelings simultaneously. That it is possible for me to be in the midst of grief and feel joy. And so it's not as simple as what are you feeling and I want to hear a word, but what are the feelings that you're having? And then there's the reality that oftentimes the word feeling is not going to work in our work, right? What's happening for you right now might be a better way of eliciting what's going on. So this feeling dimension, fueled by what was acceptable in our family, becomes an area of our own work in cultivating our internal landscape, so that we have more capacity with those that we're working with. Any comments, reflections as I say that? The continuum of little access to feelings to extensive is a useful one for us. So if my sense is that I don't have access to many feelings, how might I grow my access? How might I grow my repertoire so that I can contain any variety of feelings? And one of the things that I often think is useful is just to pay attention. Take a week or two and pay attention to where are those feelings that you're at ease with and those that you stay away from. What feelings that arise in another make you uncomfortable? This gives us a better sense of where our work is to spend time in. So we know that when we're in some work with a client and we see visible signs that something somatic, it might not be spoken, but visible signs that there is something happening inside that person. And we stop and say, what is happening right now? That requires a lot of presence, empathy, and our ability to kind of track somatically what's happening. And so often that's the resonance chamber, right? So often when we're there, something shows up that surprises both of us. Something shows up that surprises both of us. So the maybe it is a watering of the eyes, maybe it is a quivering of the lips, maybe it is some other dimension that we see when we're really present that might open a door, might create a space for something to come forward.
It's interesting that you say that, Pam. Culturally and in the corporate world, we are grown up with, little access and no access, and having a growing or rich, going towards that range itself is called vulnerability, right? And some of us have either not known that territory, or we know it from the distance, and we have been told, don't go there, that's a boundary, not going there, it's not a good thing, you're kind of stuff. And then as coaches we struggle to say, hey, how do I be comfortable with vulnerability?
Mm-hmm.
Because only when I am comfortable with vulnerability is when I can invite vulnerability into the room and can deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So it's we're back to, we have to start with ourselves. We cannot ask of another that which we have not asked ourselves or have not grown in ourselves. And I think the other thing that you bring up is really about how do we become adaptable, agile, so that in the corporate domain, as you talk about, we might not even use the word feeling. What's happening for you right now? What's going on right now? So to be able to adapt so that language does not become an impediment to our work uh, uh, is important for us.
I have a question, Pam. Like, uh, in reality, I've seen that most of the time when we become very vulnerable, there's so much judgment around about the coach, um, in an
Well,
organizational setup. I mean,
so let's just talk about vulnerability then for a minute. So there's a range of vulnerability, and certainly I think that there's some interplay between vulnerability and humility. So I can overplay vulnerability, and so what are the small ways that I show up with some vulnerability? Uh, Maybe that's a good question. So it takes a bit of vulnerability to say, I don't know what the answer is here, or I have not figured all of this out. I am not all knowing. I too have had challenging time, whatever it might be. That in some ways we could think about vulnerability in small ways as joining with another. So an example might be, even in the conversation I had this morning with this young woman whose grandmother was dying, if I over played vulnerability, I might go to sharing what it was like for me when I was present with my grandmother when she died. But on the other hand, if I simply say, this is such an important time. This is hard to sit with someone. I think this is true. That I just open the door a little bit. So I think vulnerability has to be modulated to meet the moment, and we as coaches. It's kind of a nice segue into boundaries, right? So so when we think about boundaries, uh, um, our work is not to share all of our vulnerabilities, or when you tell me that you when a client tells me that they have an impossible boss that leaves them feeling shamed. If I my work is not to say I've had the same thing happen. It's been really hard for me, and here's how I've dealt. That's not our work. We have to have boundaries. We have to be able to hear another story, to honor that story, and to stay out of that story so we can help them see it. Uh, um, so I think we demonstrate vulnerability in small ways. In boundary work, boundaries and systems, I think that I will offer you a story that was given to me by an elder in my life that I have a lot of love and respect for. And she uses the metaphor of a garden. And she says, imagine that your client has a garden, and it has a fence around it and a gate. And in the garden, there are flowers and there are weeds. And you, as the coach, have a garden: gate, fence, weeds, flowers. And if, as a coach, you're hearing your client tell their story, and you walk through their gate without asking permission and start weeding in their garden, you have lost your boundary. our work is to help our client see their weeds, help them identify where are the weeds, where are the flowers, to get on the balcony together and see that it is not to do the gardening for them. And this ability to hold that boundary, I think, is one that takes a lot of continual attention for us. Some of us are more prone to wanting to put on a cape and rescue someone than others. And so we have to know how vulnerable we are to that tendency, right? So that we can manage that. But you know, this question of supervision came up. I'm also a believer that when we finish a coaching session, that if we even have 5 minutes to step back and say, so what did I notice about our work? What did I notice about myself in this work? Where were maybe those resonant moments, and where were there missed opportunities? That work helps us continually refine as well. Any comments when I talk about boundaries in that way, folks?
Love the
So,
metaphor.
go ahead.
I love the metaphor. I really loved it. Thank you so much for offering that.
Yeah.
You know, Pam, when you talk of boundaries, what is interesting is, at least for me, the boundaries with family, the boundaries with how much you let your client or your coach, and transference plays such a big role on how you see the person you're coaching. So like Jaya said, that metaphor was fantastic, but transference seems to be coming to my mind first when you talked about boundaries, right? Old memories, old things that went well, something you pull out of your closet.
Which we do all the time, right?
Mm.
Yeah, we're often living with memories and ghosts of the past. I think transference and countertransference, I think that is at play, and I often think of it in the presence domain. What am I present to that's happening between me and my client? What am I experiencing in my client that is separate from me, that might be unique to this client, not just here with me, but in other situations? Or what is my client asking of me that is in that transferential domain? And I think that these are rich areas of exploration for us. And you know, it's like when we talk about cultivating our own internal landscape, it's so essential, because if we don't do that, then the conversations around transference and countertransference cannot happen, right? If I'm not doing my own work, then it will be hard for me to see these subtleties. And our work, cultivating our own awareness, our own internal landscape, doesn't have a destination. It's a journey without a destination that we have to be invested in as coaches. But when we get to a place where we can see that there is something, maybe my client is always wanting me to have the answer, always looking to me to tell me what to do, how I ought to proceed. That if I have boundaries and if I am present to this, I can use this. I can say, here's what I notice so often, that you would prefer that I share what I would do. Could we play with that a bit? How does that work for you? Now we're doing work that likely really matters for this person. And one of the things that I say often is, you know, we are not solving problems as coaches. We're developing, we're helping people develop. And so when we tell someone what we would do, we're not developing someone, right? And we all have blind spots. Our work, part of our work as coach, is creating the space for someone to get a new view of a blind spot, to see something that's just on the edge of awareness. And that requires our own presence, our own good boundaries, our own ability to be courageous. Actually, they're not hiring us to be a friend, to be a companion. Leaders. So my domain tends to be in the leadership domain. Leaders that continue to move up the leadership pipeline don't often get nearly enough feedback, and so that's part of what they come to us for, is to gain new perspectives. So let me push on here a bit. Let me add one more thing about boundaries, which is really boundaries and systems. I'm sure you're all playing in this domain of how do we think more systemically, and it's very interesting that when you think about how coaching in its early years was very much one-on-one, without a lot of input from a system. And what we've understood over time is that it's so helpful when we can start to think systemically. And what do I mean by thinking systemically? It is that those basic tenets that, homeostasis rules. So that means for every one of us on this call, we've got something we want to change. We've all probably got a handful of things that we say, if I made this change, I would be better off. But homeostasis rules, that means that we will remain in habit unless it really matters that we move out of that habit. That sometimes in organizational development, they talk about no change happens unless the platform is burning. There has to be some good reason for me to make a change. So systems thinking, homeostasis rules. It's not just this person who doesn't. It's the human nature, and that there is no one to blame. So it's very often the case that someone comes to us and they're making a case that, I know there may be things I could do a little bit better, but honestly, it's the other person. It's my boss, or it's my coworker, or those of you that are doing other sorts of relational coaching, it's my partner, or it's my child, right? But the question is, what is it that you could shift that would change this interaction? Because that's how systemic thinking is helpful to us. We all play a role in everything that's happening, and we can't change another human being. So our work needs to be relative to what could I adjust that might shift what's happening here. Any comments when I say these things?
Yeah, Pam, what's coming to my mind is like I see that there's oneness. I mean, I don't know, this is what's resonating for me. Like there's completeness and oneness, but there's also separateness. Where in that separateness, there's a celebration of that unique person. And, in boundaries, it's all about, for me, sensing that there's oneness, yet there is that uniqueness and separateness. And it's completely coming from that sensing, because then I would be able to, keep that, but there's a celebration of each person there. At the same time, there's oneness. I mean, this is what's just coming for me. So when I look at the system and things like that, it's feeling like something that's larger, and there's something that's whole and one. At the same time, also what's existing is separateness and uniqueness. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And any other comments? It's the dance. One of the dances and boundaries that I think is a useful way of thinking about it is, when am I helping my client see the story, and when have I been drawn into the story? When have I lost my way and now I'm in the story? And being able to notice that, because it will happen for all of us in different ways, right? But to be able to notice that, to be able to step back and see that, even if it's after the coaching session, I got drawn into that. It helps us continually recalibrate. So when did I stay in my garden, and when did I go weeding in someone else's garden? When they're coming to me to learn how to do their own weeding. My job is to help them see the weeds, not to pull them for them. Yeah, yeah. So boundaries and systems, we could spend a lot of time on that, and hopefully we've touched on a couple of things that are particularly useful. I'm moving along here because I know we have limited time. So embodiment, there's a woman by the name of Wendy Palmer. You may know her work, and she has this wonderful quote: "The way we sit and stand changes the way we think and feel." The way we sit and stand changes the way we think and feel. Powerful, powerful. To notice how we sit and stand, to notice how our client sits and stands, to see our body as a resource that we can call on, that we can cultivate, that can help us embed changes that we want to make. This is powerful territory for us. And so it might be that I am coaching someone who wants to be viewed as a stronger leader than they are currently viewed at, who wants to position themselves for a promotion, and yet what we see, what I observe, is the voice is very shallow. It's really up here. You know, my breathing is happening right here, and I'm a little bit caved in, and I do not look very confident, and it, on the language front, I might be apologizing, right? So all of these dimensions we can work with, and to say, so what happens if I take a deeper breath? And I move my breath all the way down to my diaphragm, and my voice lowers. How does that change how I show up, how I experience myself, how others might experience me? What happens when I hold my shoulders back? And on and on. So it turns out that we embody who we are, and so if we're wanting to make changes, then our body can be a resource to support those changes that we're wanting to make. And so we have to ask ourselves first, what as coach are we embodying? What do I embody? How am I showing up? And are there ways that I want to cultivate that more? Are there embodiment practices that I might engage in that are going to be helpful for me in my work? And then of course that as well for what I can observe in my client. And then finally, I'm going to just move on to courage, because I think that courage is so important for us to cultivate in our work. And what do I mean when I say courage? It takes some courage to share an observation, to be able to say, you know, I want to stop us for a moment and just step back and share something that I notice that so often we start with what you want to focus on, and then you leap from that to another, to another, to another. And there is a sort of, I find myself just a little confused. I wonder where you are. Could we just explore that? So you notice how I'm saying it, no judgment. I just notice this, and could we look at it together? Or I want to just spend a little time stepping back from our work and noticing that what brings you to coaching is that you want to be seen in a new way as the leader of this team. And what I notice is that every time we have a coaching session, you show up late. I just find this interesting. So could we look at this together? You know, what does this mean? That takes courage. But you notice I've got my heart connected to the courage. I notice how often you say, I might be wrong. That I might be wrong is a part of your language on a regular basis. Are you aware of that? Let's play with that. How does that happen for you? Where do you think that comes from? So we have so many ways to, and of course, voice. I notice how shallow your voice is. And I wonder if we could play with that. I wonder if that breathing from way up here destabilizes. Could we play with that? Could we just try pushing the breath down a little bit lower and see what happens? So our courage, I notice how often you share the errors your boss makes, the way your boss could be different. And I wonder when you go there, how that works for you. So now I'm drawing attention to, I'm going to bring us around to what it is that you could change. How that tendency to look out serves you as opposed to looking in. So all of these acts, these courageous acts, are really about sharing an observation without a judgment. Even being a little playful about it. We don't have to, our work doesn't have to be so darn serious all the time, right? We can be a little bit playful about it. And what we're doing is helping someone, we're turning up the heat, right? We're turning up the heat a little bit because change isn't going to happen if we don't do that. And we're sharing a pattern that we see, that is largely invisible to the other. And this facilitates growth, change, development. So let me just stop there. And I know we just have a few minutes left. So I'm going to drop this deck off of the screen so that we could just talk about this and see what kinds of comments or reflections you might have. I would love to be able to take a picture of all of us as well, if you would allow me to share this on LinkedIn. So I would love to see faces. That's awesome. That's right. Yeah. So comments, reflections, and anything that you want to ask or share. You know, I'm yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you. I think it's one of the great sessions I've had in this year. Thank you, Jaya, for this. I think my takeaway is coaching presence. And when Jaya actually talked about how one's upbringing and the cultural lineage takes, I was about to share. So throughout my lifetime, we have been told always respect the elders. Do not, ever say anything which makes them uncomfortable. I guess, that vulnerability affected me. Uh, I heard some possible solution where we could, probably improve 3 minutes a day. I think that's the takeaway for me from this session. Thank you, Pam.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
congratulations on you becoming grandmom.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Others? Any others?
Yeah, I think, Pam, the metaphor that you um, spoke about on the boundaries, that was very powerful, very, very powerful.
Good. Good. You know what's interesting is that metaphor, we can hold a metaphor that metaphor might stay with you. So that really underlines how powerful that is in our work with others when we can find the metaphor that works. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Pam, for me, the slide that stood out was the connectedness. Like, we need to stay in the middle and not really go here or there, because I
Yeah.
tend to, move somewhere else in the spectrum. But yes, that was a very powerful one. The visual impact that it had on me.
Yeah. So I want to just share a practice that could work there, but it could work in many places that I think is useful for us as coaches. So when we notice an area where we might shift, to do nothing but notice it for a period of time, to change nothing, but to notice how often I go to, it might be to overcare or to rescue, and to ask myself a couple of questions. What do I miss when I do that? And what might be the cost of that? And when I take my time and do that for even 10 days, then when I start to make a shift, I can see what I'm shifting much more clearly, and I have some compassion for what I was doing in the past. So change happens slowly, and awareness can be self-correcting. So think about that. Awareness in and of itself can be self-correcting. So before we have to close, I have one ask of you. Some of you talked about having read my book or maybe listened to it. If you have, and if you would be willing to leave a review on Amazon, it only needs to be a sentence. I'm working very hard to get the publisher to publish this in other parts of the world, and that is very helpful. So I would be most appreciative. And it's been wonderful to spend this time with all of you.
Yep.
Thank you for taking out time for us, Pam. Thank you so much, especially
Thank
when
you so much for a wonderful session, Pam.
Thank you,
And
Pam.
thank you,
Thank you
Jaya,
so
for
much.
organizing
Thank you,
this.
Jaya, for the organizing.
Thank you. Thank you, Pam.